If you get it right, it can do a lot. But if you don't get it right, it can do a lot of damage. It's showtime. Thanks for joining us. It's time to sit down, put in those earbuds so as not to disturb the neighbors, and join us for another episode of Off Book, a podcast where we talk all about Broadway, movies, TV shows, and anything else that we want to geek out about. I'm Marc Stouffer III.
And I'm Ashley. Today we're going to try to talk about some Broadway musicals that we think could make good movies and some movies that we think could make good musicals.
This is going to be all based on our personal opinions. If we don't mention something, it still might be good. We just didn't think of it. Also, to get it out of the way, we're not counting a Wicked movie since Universal has already announced that they're making one, even if all evidence seems to show otherwise. First, we're going to look at what a Nightmare Before Christmas musical on Broadway might look like. This is one of those ideas that either would do really well or really, really poorly. I think that there's a lot of potential because it's such a well-known show, and other shows in the Tim Burton style haven't made it on Broadway, like Beetlejuice, and I think that it could do very well.
Yeah, I agree, and like it already in itself is like kind of like a musical, but it's like a movie musical. You've got like Jack singing and like everyone. There's all parts. The whole opening scene is a song, and
right.
Like you were saying, like The Nightmare Before Christmas is such a well-known movie that most people very love, and yes, it's like played a lot, like a go-to Halloween or Christmas movie, I guess, and I think it would do really well because it's just one of those shows that a lot of people go to for like comfort and love.
Yeah, it's already set up a lot like a two-act structure. You have the character of Jack, who's immediately a protagonist, and you get this conflict right off the bat where he doesn't really want to fit into the society that he's a part of. You get this really weird society that's interesting to just look at, and you get this kind of interesting exposition, and then you get the conflict with Christmas, and he's trying to figure out what that is, and that could be very cool visually to kind of show these different holidays and their towns or the physical embodiment of the holiday and playing around with that. And you have the love interest, and you have the villain in Oogie Boogie, and you have the kind of act break as Jack decides to make Christmas his own, and then Act 2 is kind of all the stuff that happens from then on. I think it could work really well if you have the right creative team that knows how to adapt it well.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like the story of Nightmare Before Christmas is one that a lot of people can relate to, where it's like you're so used to being in this like continuous cycle of doing the same thing over and over and over again. You kind of just want to find something different and find something new. That's something you haven't experienced before. And then they may end up finding that, but then end up realizing that it's something they don't want or they don't fit in with. And like I definitely think that's one thing that a lot of people can relate to, which is what makes this show so good. And I feel like having live actors can portray that kind of background story so well, because obviously you have like a lot more facial expressions with live acting rather than like clay.
That's true. Human faces do tend to emote more than clay.
Yeah.
Not to mention that, like I said, Beetlejuice has worked very well on Broadway, and I think that there's a lot of the fan community that would be very eager to see another Tim Burton musical that's of a similar aesthetic adapted on Broadway. However, that is kind of also the problem, that this is a musical that's very similar to Beetlejuice just in and of itself, and the creative team of Beetlejuice on Broadway has said that they took a lot of their visual cues from Nightmare Before Christmas. So not only is it similar in style, it's also very similar in how it looks and the set and costume design. And so I think that you might run into a little bit of redundancy in the fact that this is just Beetlejuice, but not. Not to mention that the original movie was made out of clay, and Jack Skellington is a giant skeleton. And you can, paint certain things, but I don't know very many people that have a skeleton head, and putting on a mask for a full show is kind of improbable. So I'm not sure exactly how that would work.
Yeah, it's definitely like a big problem. And like with Sally, like one part of the movie, she falls out of this like tower and her arm falls off.
Yeah.
And then she sews it back on. Like you can't do that with a real person. That's something,
as far as you know.
I guess. That's just something that a human body can't do. It also, if you look at the characters, like the mayor, whose head can flip,
Yes.
that would be one very hard detail to get in this live action musical, because humans can't do that. So there would definitely be a lot of drawbacks and things that they'd have to pass to be able to get this musical similar, well, as similar to the movie as they possibly can.
Yeah, I think that having regular people playing these characters looking like people wouldn't exactly work as well as something like Beetlejuice, where all of the characters look humanish even if they're not. Not to mention that I think that we mentioned the opening number of the show, and I think that part of the reason that that opening number means so much is because it just looks so impressive. There's so much detail in that scene because the sculptors and the animators all put a lot of work into what the town looks like, and that level of detail and that level of stylistic choice isn't always something you can find on Broadway, especially when you keep switching locations. So you find something like Beetlejuice, where the house is very detailed, but it also, that's basically the only main location, and it does change throughout the show. It gets changed 3 different times as ownership continues to pass from person to person. But Jack goes from one location to a completely different location, and if both of those locations have to be filled with detail, how do you do that going back and forth between 2 very, very complicated sets live? And I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, and even to mention the forest, where he goes into the forest and finds these holiday trees and then goes completely into this other world. Like, how would you make a set that could transfer that easily? Like, it just would be almost impossible.
Yeah, even not to mention Beetlejuice at every single turn, but even Beetlejuice, which has a very similar transition, where it's the same location, but it looks completely different. That all happens off stage. So even in a Tim Burton style play, where they have to change the aesthetic multiple times of the entire show, it's done when you can't see it. The live transformation from, for those of you that know musical, from the Beatles in Beetlejuice takes the house over, and you get this kind of transition from one to the other. But that's just all lighting and effects. The actual set transformation doesn't come until after the act break, when the crew has that much time to put it together. And so that kind of transformation there wouldn't even work. I don't know how they would do that, short of creating a kind of a split stage effect. And I think that if you only have half the stage, you run into the same issue where it doesn't look quite as impressive.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the biggest drawbacks I feel like they would have trying to create this musical, with all the set changes. And because, I mean, even looking at the scenes, it flips back and forth all the time.
Mm-hmm.
From the panicking Halloween Town people trying to find Jack, and Jack's just over in Christmas Town, and then it cuts to him, and it's just like a constant back and forth, and that would be very, very, very hard to do on stage.
Yeah, stylistically it would definitely work, but it would need a lot of reworking in some places to make it suitable for the stage at all.
Mm-hmm.
And now, ad time. Today's episode is sponsored by Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, the reboot, the reunion special, the podcast. Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, the reboot, the reunion special, the podcast is a brand new podcast hosted by original members of Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, the reunion special, which was a reunion special for Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, the reboot, which was a reboot of Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, which was a TV adaptation of Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, which was a film version of Entertainment, the Broadway musical, a new, at the time, musical about working in the entertainment industry. Now, some 50 years later, reminisce about Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, the reboot, the reunion special, and Entertainment, the Broadway musical, the movie, the series, the reboot, the reunion special, the podcast. For the behind-the-scenes information, old memories, and updates on what's coming next. They already have a couple episodes on Spotify, so be sure to go check them out after you finish this episode.
Okay, new rule, franchises don't get to have names anymore.
Honestly, that might be the best bet. Back to the main programming. Next, we're going to take a look at what a Come From Away movie might look like. For those of you who don't know, Come From Away is a Broadway musical that takes place just after 9/11. So once the Twin Towers were attacked, there were several planes that were in the air trying to land in the U.S., but the United States closed their airspace, so that way they could prevent any further attacks. And so all the planes that were in the air were redirected to a large airport in Newfoundland that's been there for a long time because planes used to stop there to refuel, but then now they don't anymore, so it's just a giant empty airport, in a pretty small town in Newfoundland. And so it's people from all over the world. They're confused. They don't know what's going on. The people in the town were just told right before they landed. Nobody has any idea what's going on. But it's just kind of the story of a couple days, I think it might be closer to a week, of everybody just trying to figure out what's going on. There's a lot of self-discovery, and people learn a lot of lessons about tolerance and about learning about other people and about your relationships and who you are. A tagline of the show kind of is, because we come from everywhere, we all come from away, which is the name of the show. You get it? It's wordplay, you see? Come From Away opened very recently, comparatively speaking, on Broadway. And it's been doing very well. And pretty much everyone that sees it is saying that they really liked it. And so it's possible that at some point down the road, there will be a movie adaptation. And I think that it could work. Honestly, in my opinion, I think that Come From Away is a very similar story thematically to Dear Evan Hansen. I think that it's a lot of the emotional side, and you get to know these characters. It's very character-based. All Broadway shows are kind of character-based. But I think that this one specifically is a lot about the emotions and what they're going through. Similarly to Dear Evan Hansen, I think that the close-ups and the cinematography could really help make a film version of that show kind of elevated in a way that you can't do on Broadway.
Yeah, and I feel like definitely this show would be like very, I don't know exactly what the word for it would be, but special to like especially Americans, because they did, like, majority of them have lived through 9/11, and I definitely think this show hits really close to home for most Americans, because they've either had parents who lived through 9/11 or even parents who may have died in 9/11. And then we also have all of these different backgrounds. And I think that's one thing that's so special, like, about the show. You can learn, like, the differences between everyone that is on a flight, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think that, to me, I can't stop picturing the cinematography in the plane when it lands, because there's a scene where the plane's landed in Newfoundland, but the flight attendants have been told not to tell anybody anything. So these people were mysteriously redirected from where they were supposed to be going for any random trip, full of people they don't know, into a town they don't know where they are. They have no idea what's happening, and I can just picture the cinematography going through those aisles and seeing all the people. And I think that you have the ability with that cinematography to really get very close and personal with those characters when you need to. And I think that you can really start to tell these small stories, and I think that that's what the show's all about. But I think you also have the ability, when it's beneficial, to really show these wide shots and show how isolating it feels to be somewhere where you don't know, and to show these crowds as everyone's trying to navigate through whatever's going on, and they're very confused. And I think that the idea of these buses coming from the airport into Newfoundland when it's completely dark, you get to see that very stark contrast in light and dark, and you get to see these giant gates of the Salvation Army location. And I think that you can really do a lot with tone and with visual style that you can't do on Broadway in terms of focusing and supplementing what's going on visually.
Yeah, and it also opens the opportunity for us to get the perspective of these passengers.
Yes.
Like with a musical, like a live action musical, you can't really put yourself into these people's shoes, because you're sitting in the audience. But with film, you can easily have a camera as someone's perception and just looking around, what's going on. And that definitely opens a lot of opportunity for people to be able to connect with those characters even more than they would on stage.
Yeah. I also think that making it a movie can add so much more realism to something that was so real for a lot of people, like you were mentioning. The set for the show on Broadway is very minimalist. It's just a bunch of chairs and some tables, and those chairs and those tables continuously get moved around and put in different formations to represent a plane or a restaurant or a gym floor where they're all staying. And I think that works very well to show what they're trying to do on Broadway. But I think if you have an actual plane, you have these actual people, then it's not that kind of minimalist style. You really get a feel for this is actually happening, and you get to kind of blur the lines between reality and fiction. because it's all based on what actually happened. I think it could add a lot of depth, and I think it could illuminate what a lot of people were feeling around that time to people who haven't experienced it or who don't really understand it. I think it could really be a lesson to some people who weren't there.
Yeah, and for like especially our generation who most likely haven't like didn't experience 9/11, you know, like it can give us a sense for what those people felt, you know, like you were saying, like being able to get that perception, and it would give us a sense of, wow, this may have actually happened, or wow, this did happen.
Yeah. One of the main tenets of the show is that the entire thing is double cast. There's only a cast of, it's a handful of people, I think it's somewhere around 10, that are playing a bunch of different characters, which helps to give you that ability to feel very close to these characters, because there aren't that many people on stage at any given time. And like I said, shot sizes can definitely help with that, and you have the ability with a film to get those wide shots and to show the crowds, but I think that there's something that you lose when every single character is played by a different person, because none of the characters get a ton of time, because you just can't give everybody that much time when the film's only so long. And so I think you lose a little bit of that intimacy because you have so many different people in the cast in order to accurately represent how many people were there and the kinds of people that were there. Not to mention that 9/11 wasn't a musical event. It was a lot for a lot of people, and I think that you run the risk, if you make a musical about the events that happened after 9/11, you could offend somebody, it could bring back painful memories, you could lose a little bit of realism, because this isn't a film, this is very realistic and everyone starts singing and dancing, and even though it's done in a very respectful way, you run the risk of it being weird and feeling fake, because people don't, in a lot of places, not in my household, but in a lot of places, people don't just randomly start singing and dancing.
Knowing our generation now, like knowing the people in America now, I feel that this show could easily offend someone. Like there would obviously be someone who would be offended. And especially with such a touchy subject as 9/11. And I definitely think that could also be like the downfall of making this into a movie, whereas like a lot of people would be like, oh, what's that? And then go see it in this movie theater and they'd be like, oh, well, that's kind of offensive. They're singing while 9/11 is happening. Like that's like, who does that? But then like, I feel like not as many people are open to like Broadway. So like, it's more of a closed community, whereas not as a bunch of people will be seeing it. But if they make it into this big movie, then obviously a lot of people are going to be seeing it. It's going to be broadcasted everywhere. And like I said, knowing our generation, someone would get offended.
Yeah. Overall, a movie version of Come From Away could work very, very well. You have to be so careful in how you do it to make sure it's accurate to what actually happened, to try to emulate the original Broadway version, but not to be too close to it, to get the story right, to make something that it can move people, that is respectful to the people that experienced it and can mean something, but isn't too heavy. And I think you end up with this. There's a very, very specific thing that if you get it right, it can do a lot. But if you don't get it right, it can do a lot of damage. And I think that if it is going to be made into a movie at some point, that's what the creative team needs to know, is that there's a very, very thin wire they can walk in terms of what will work and what won't.
Yeah, I agree with that.
This episode is now being banished to the netherworld. If you want to listen again, just say its name 3 times. And then go listen to it.
Next week, we will be talking about the Tony Awards. What's good about them, what's bad about them, and what we think they'll look like in the future. Make sure you don't miss that. From 2 theater nerds with too much free time, this has been Off Book. And until next week, have a safe and fun Halloween.